We decided to increase the envelope by 500 billion euros.
An unprecedented package of support, and that was the right thing to do.
We need to invest together to exit this enormous crisis.
Alors il y a des trous dans la raquette. Bercy est en train de faire ses comptes et effectivement les comptes font peur.
A warm welcome to one and all to our second panel discussion as part of the 2021 Coface Country Risk Conference. What makes a state efficient when faced with such an unexpected and large health and economic crisis? The state and the economy together for better and for worse. That will be our topic for discussion today in various European countries and in Europe as a whole as well. Together with me to discuss this fascinating topic today are Maya Atig. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. You're the Managing Director of the French Banking Federation, la Fédération Bancaire Française. Enrico Letta, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
You're the Dean of the School for International Affairs at Sciences Po, of course, a former Italian Prime Minister, Member of Parliament, Member of European Parliament, and the author of many books as well on international and European affairs. On the line with us today are also Professor Michael Hüther. He is Professor and Economic Director of the Institut der Deutschen Wirtschaft in Köln. Willkommen, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
And we are also joined in Madrid by Pablo de Ramon-Laca, who is the Director General of the Treasury and Financial Policy of the Spanish Treasury in Madrid. Thanks very much for being with us today, Pablo, as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
To get the discussion started, joining us also this afternoon is Sylvain Aurébi. Sylvain is the CEO of a company called Kusmi Tea, which has activities and stores in various European countries. And we thought it was an interesting and very useful perspective to start with the point of view of an entrepreneur to get this discussion going. So, Sylvain, the question we really want to ask you today is, from your perspective, faced with this very difficult crisis for your company as many others operating in various European countries, what have you seen as the most efficient way governments have been trying to help companies such as yours?
Well, this is a wide subject. First of all, you know, all of you know that there has been a tremendous difficulty this year for us in retail in general, and I'm speaking about retailers because this is what I know best. It's been very, very tough, and all companies have been in major stress, and so we expected quite a lot from Europe in general and governments in particular, and I must say that we have been very positively impressed by what the EU has done as a whole. We've had a very quick response from all governments. We've got a very positive response. And globally, we feel that the needs of our businesses have been understood and met by the EU, and that it has allowed to fight unemployment in our companies and in Europe in general, to fight bankruptcies, of course, because without all the subsidies and the helps from EU and the governments, there would have been a lot of bankruptcies. We've had very positive and quick answers to cash problems, which hit most of course, retailers, but most of companies all over Europe. And that cash problem has been answered by of course, governments, but also commercial banks. And I'm glad to have Mrs. Atig with us today because I know the French banks have done a fantastic job, and they've followed us quite nicely, starting in March. where I don't know if it was a European measure, but there was a postponement, a moratorium on loans for 6 months, and that helped a lot of companies, of course. And there's been a variety of measures that the EU has implemented, which have been very, very positive. Of course, it's been different levels according to countries. And I have Kousmiti stores in 5 European countries. France, of course, where we have about 85 stores, Germany, Austria, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And we found...
So who did the best job, Sylvain? Who did the best job of helping you out?
Well, if Bruno Le Maire is listening to us, I would say France, of course. No, really, France has done a great job. France has done a fantastic job because where we have a state that is very is there all the time. You know, this is our problem, by the way, that the state is overwhelming. But for a change, we've been happy to have them around.
All right.
France has been good because we've had that short-time work, le chômage partiel, immediately and very widely. We have loans, guaranteed loans, where the state takes 90% gives 90% of guarantee to commercial banks. We've had the Solidarity Fund, which helps all type of companies, small and now bigger. And so the French government has done absolutely 100% of what could be done, really. Okay. And so I would say the number one. That doesn't mean that the others didn't do anything. On the contrary. But you have different ways of acting. Like people like Luxembourg, they're very business friendly, business oriented, and they've done things very quickly, quite nicely. It was online. You could get help online. You could get loans quite easily, and that was easy. Belgium was more difficult because you have 2 different entities, like the Flemish part it acts differently from the Wallonia, and the help we got was much smaller, not on the short-time work, which was okay, but nevertheless smaller than in other countries. But also the help that you get when you have a store in the Flemish part is different from what you have in Wallonia. Okay. I don't know why, but that was the case. And then Austria was quite good also, where we got short-time work very easily, where the employees got about 80 to 90% of their salaries. We had a subsidy also for loss in revenue, like we had in France. And of course, against that, we had to keep the employees. You couldn't get rid of them after having the money.
Okay.
But I don't think you had much in Germany and Austria. You didn't get. I don't think you get those loans guaranteed by the state. Okay. And you didn't get much help on the rents. Also, when you're a retailer, the big thing is the rent. Okay. I don't think you got enough help from governments on rents, which is the major problem for us.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Sylvain. Very interesting way to get things going here. And I think it's good also to be able to, in this day and age, start a panel discussion with a rather positive and optimistic message, which is that all in all, in this very difficult crisis, in various European countries, governments have been rather efficient at helping you out. And perhaps, Enrico, Letta, this is the first message we can comment on today. Government has answered the call, and it has, as far as it could, to a large extent, done the job.
Yes, I totally agree, and I have to say that it was not only governments, but it was really at the European level a good coordination. Right. And we'll come back to Europe as well, of course. I think it was a very good coordination, and it was very fast, quick, very reactive. the way in which governments worked. Of course, it was not easy, and we had good coordination on some issues, mostly on the economic side. It was very difficult on the healthcare, on the sanitary furnitures, where at the very beginning, I think we all remember the mess that was the situation. But I have to say that it is very important for our conversation to set up the scene by saying that the prominent role of the state in the economy is not only something that is starting or that started in March 2020. It was something that was preparing before. And it was preparing before, I think, because of the outcomes of the previous crisis. Previous crisis created...
You mean the financial crisis of 2008? Yeah, the financial crisis,
yeah. That created a lot of anxieties among consumers, workers, and the people in our societies, and many problems also within the economic world. Small companies affected by high degree of globalization, competition, and worldwide competition, the rise of China and Asian competitors. So I think we had, in the last years, sort of revenge of the state in terms of being present and being very proactive. So when the crisis came in March 2020, we started working on the basis of a discussion that was already present there. And this is why I think all the plans at national level and the European plan and the rest was there also because of the previous discussion and the preparation because of the lessons learned from the previous crisis.
Pablo de Ramon-Laca in Madrid, one of the striking aspects as well was that the financial response has been very strong, and another aspect of it is that there was no such thing as panic on financial markets, for example, that the financial world felt secure, that the liquidity situation was taken care of, and what actually, given the seriousness of the crisis, could have turned into, easily have turned into, something really dramatic, did not happen.
Indeed, indeed. I think this time round, the diagnosis was relatively simple. Last time round, in the global financial crisis, there was a moral dimension to the crisis. It was actually somebody's fault if they got into trouble with their financial system because of lax previous regulations, etc. This pandemic was a proverbial, and excuse the comparison, alien invasion. That was absolutely nobody's fault, and therefore affects everyone potentially in exactly the same way. And so coordination was made that much simpler that way. So when asked, how is government efficient in the management of a crisis? I wouldn't say it's efficient. I'd say it's the best equipped to deal with, to deliver public goods. In this case, there were a few obvious public goods like healthcare, policing, restrictions to mobility. Then there was less obvious ones like the government's obvious fiscal power, monetary power. The ECB is autonomous and it's independent, but that doesn't make it any less governmental. So it exercises its power in full in a coordinated way. And this is central banks all over the world. But also there is a more subtle power that governments have that can help in a crisis. This is the power to coordinate private agents, which one could call the bully pulpit. The bank moratoria have been mentioned. And much of that have been agreed, and these moratoria have been extended voluntarily by a banking sector more than willing to cooperate. And Maya will of course certify this. But they are under the umbrella of the European Banking Authority's agreement to provide this favorable treatment. So in this way, government acted as a way to coordinate the goodwill of private agents for which the Nash equilibrium would be possibly not to cooperate. So that is what has been exercised well in this case. And in the financial markets, I think this time round, governments have a function in financial markets in which, because they are the benchmark against which other credits are measured and compared. So they deploy the full faith and credit of a modern state managed by a legitimately constituted government with the consent of the population to tax now and in the future. This provides it with the ability to issue the safe asset, which everyone's run towards in a crisis in order to feel safe, put it that way.
Okay.
So this ability helps it extend government guarantees, which we have done. So this is what's worked well this time around.
Of course, this remains a very deep and serious crisis, and we don't want to give the impression that everything is fine and everything has been working out. But certainly, this aspect of it has been working, and particularly, as Pablo was pointing out, the relationship between government and banks, and the extent to which governments relied on banks very heavily in a number of countries, and of course, specifically in France, as you know better than me, to make sure that as many companies as possible could remain in business, and therefore as many jobs as possible could be saved.
Exactly. This is the way in which the response was built, in fact, since the first days. And it comes from the very nature of this crisis. We have been going through different crises for tens of years, but this one is a very big sanitary crisis on an economic ground, which was in many cases safe and with solid economic ground. So how do you do to transport the economy and the people from a moment where they're safe to another moment where they're safe, but they have to weather a storm? And so on the basis of this common analysis, the work which has been done relied on two words, trust and dialogue. And it was very simple. Trust me, discuss with me, we will not full agree from the first minute maybe, but in an hour, we'll agree. And this was very important, for example, for building the solution of state-guaranteed loans. The issue was very simple. Build a liquidity bridge for companies. And it was built in less than 1 week. It was distributed very quickly. And the idea was to say the French banking system is very close to its customers. And he is able to analyze in a very few weeks lots of situations, lots of individual situations, and to distribute this product with, I would say, a controlled risk on the signature of the state and for the banks as well, with a good alignment of interest. So this is how it was built, with, I would say, a lot of trust between the people, and also the idea was also to be responsive during the crisis. For example, in the first days, we didn't have any reporting, and so we built this reporting very quickly in a couple of weeks. We then realized very quickly that we needed specific disposals for companies in the tourism sector. So we built a specific state-guaranteed loans for the tourism sector. And we all built that, not always with the state holding the pen, but with the state giving the objective and us bringing the solution. So we are very proud of that. And thank you very much to Sylvain for his words.
Professor Hüther, what is your assessment as to what the various governments in Europe responses have been to the crisis? What from your perspective has worked, and what perhaps has been found wanting, if anything?
Yeah, I think we should be realized that the first phase of the crisis, just beginning in last March, was different to the later phases. In the first phase, it was quite clear for the policy actors what they had to do. Liquidity matters, because we had a symmetric shock, more or less, to all European economies in the same time, and a symmetric shock on the supply side as well as the demand side. So it was just in the first row, the first challenge, how to stabilize, as already was said, the company, the business models, and the employment. And we had the instruments from the past. Specifically in Germany, the short-time working scheme was used just from scratch. from in a new design, what it was, the experience from the past we had for that. And the second, we used a lot of instruments we had in our specific public bank system, the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau and all the others, to provide loans, guaranteed loans to the companies in this time. And we paid, first time ever, specific transfers to small and very small business and small medium-sized business. So what I would say, in the first phase, more or less in all European countries, they had to do the same, and it was quite clear what was the challenge. Mm-hmm. The European monetary policy needs few days, because we should not forget that in the first time, just in the mid of March, we had some panic and in the financial markets, but this panic could be stopped in the third week of March. And it's looking back, it's really amazing to see that since then, since the second half of March 2020, we had a more or less stable ongoing path of re-evaluation and an increase in the asset valuation and asset markets. So this makes clear that after first shock, also the ECB had used the right words, used the right instruments, and was able to define an appropriate surrounding for the fiscal policy approach. The second phase, we shouldn't forget, was then in summer, when all government was asked for specific programs, as we should named it, as a deficit spending design, because then we had the reopening of the markets, the demand shock came down, so to say, and on the other side we had to re-incentives the supply side to come back, and specifically in Germany and in Europe we had to realize that the worst thing was closing the borders. First time since the beginning of European integration, in March and April, we closed the borders in Europe. And this was really a threat to the global value chain, the international value chain. And so it was one very important point to come back to a common European approach in this time. The March program, sure, and all the other $1 billion of euros which were available, and then next generation EU as a second phase, and as I said already, the deficit spending programs in summer. That makes clear that in the third and fourth quarter last year we had an ongoing upswing of the economy, totally different, a little bit different for the European countries due to their structure. Germany is more oriented to the export market, so it was a little bit easier. We could bring in the positive impact of a strong regaining in China and East Asia, for example. So you see in the end of the year only -5% for the GDP in Germany, minus something like 7 or 8% in France, a little bit more in UK. So the differentiation has to do with the structure of the economy. But overall, I would say in 2020, the policy action and policy reaction was appropriate.
Okay, so I mean, if I were to summarize the various points of view, I guess you could say so far so good. And if you were to summarize perhaps the way the government is acted, certainly in France, there's this sentence by French President Emmanuel Macron, "Quoi qu'il en coûte," which is pretty much the equivalent of Mario Draghi's in past times of whatever it takes. Enrico Letta, how far can you take whatever it takes? When does the moment come? Because obviously, what you're all saying is that the response has been massive. The response has been appropriate. Obviously, it hasn't solved everything. It remains a very difficult crisis and a deep recession. But a lot of good has been done. How much more can you do, and how much longer can you do it? And is there a concern that at some point, if the crisis lasts too long, we'll come to the end of how useful a state or a government can be?
Frankly speaking, concerns are very high. And of course, if we take the example of Mario Draghi's, whatever it takes.
It was in 2012.
Yes, and now we are 9 years later yeah. And it is still working.
Yes.
But of course, I think it depends on the pandemic, on the way in which the vaccine campaign will work. And I think there's an immediate link with this vaccine reaction. But in my view, it is impossible to think that this injection of state money or state tools can last too much. I think we have to be very cautious on that because the economy has to start again to work in usual environment with usual behaviors. I don't think that we have to imagine a future in which we will be back at 19 because there will be a lot of changes and there I see a role for the state to push the changes and to help companies in changing, for instance, for the digitalization, for instance, in many changes in supply chain and retail activities. At the same time, it is absolutely necessary to think again the way in which coordination can work. My guess and my hope is that maybe G20 or OECD or G7 can set up a sort of index of the cost of non-coordination. That is, for me, one of the main lessons for this pandemic, because if you take the first period of the pandemic, the lack of coordination, not only on sanitary furniture, but on many issues, created a sort of panic, sort of high price in terms of human life, but also in terms of resources, financial resources. We wasted a lot of money because of the non-coordination. So why don't we, for instance, as lessons from the crisis, we create a sort of index of this cost of non-coordination that can be, I think, a very important red alarm for the future and can bring countries to think that coordinating can save lives, can save money, can create more virtuous tools, behaviors, and I think that this coordination can be the very challenge for the future too.
Pablo, are you also concerned that whatever it takes may come to an end and that the consequences would be devastating?
Whatever it takes is a very political declaration. It's not a matter of instruments. It's usually a matter of political will to coordinate. And so I think the political will still be there as long as there is consensus as to the nature of the problems we are facing. If the narratives change in the politics of each country as to why other countries are suffering more, or why some countries are suffering more than others, and begin to once again attribute it to moral differences or cultural differences or essence, more essential inherent differences within countries, then I think we're in trouble because coordination fails. For the moment, I think it is pretty solid because an excellent job has been done by our elders and betters at the G20 and our elders and betters within European governments to find a common diagnosis of this crisis and a common prescription. So as long as we remain trustful of one another, I think this can go on for a significant period. But of course, we have to be vigilant and we have to prepare for a moment in which that trust collapses.
And how do you prepare for that? What does that mean to prepare for it?
Well, I'd like to say something as topical as hope for the best but prepare for the worst, but I'm not going to. It is to help as much as possible with an eye on not incurring too much debt. The narrative has changed about debt sustainability. It's not the same as having, having 120% like Spain has. Debt to GDP is not the same issue as it was 3 years ago. And that's very welcome because what matters for debt sustainability is the debt burden. But if you'll excuse us, we will incur a little more debt, but watch out not to have too much of it. Because there are certain political narratives out there that still reasonably believe that there are limits to debt and to the impact on growth, etc. And so we are still prudent, I think, in that sense. So, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
on résout le problème de la destruction de valeur par de l'endettement.
Professor Hüther, Germany is notoriously known for its concern with debt, and are you concerned with whatever it takes? And when you see these debt increases in various member countries, including Germany, of course, but nowhere near as much in other countries, do you worry about how far this may go and what it could entail?
I think we should realize that in Germany, just 2 years ago, the public and political debate changed concerning the public debt and the debt break. In this crisis management, we saw very early in summer, in the springtime, there was not really any hesitation to use deficit spending to cure and to compensate the loss caused by the pandemic. There was something like whatever it takes in the German fiscal policy, in fact. And overall, as I said, we were very successful. And if you're looking on the interest side, the interest rate is for the, as you know, for the German bonds, for the government bonds are still negative for long term. That means the German state has still a high level of credibility defined by the markets. There is a need for a safe haven, for safe assets. And this will go on, in my perspective, due to the demographic situation. The aging of societies in the OECD caused this phenomenon. So from this side, there are not really a fiscal limit, but we have to look on the excess burden of if we have a lot of public debt in our public budgets, and we have to manage it. But also for this year, for 2021, there is no need to coming back for the debt break. We have the next clause, an exemption clause is used, and we have to manage a new phase of consolidation starting 22 or 23. Mm-hmm. My general impression is that the debate in Germany is just changing. Maybe you have read that 4 weeks ago, the chancellor, the head of the chancellery in Berlin, close to Angela Merkel, wrote a piece in the German Handelsblatt saying that there is a need for debate about the debt break we have in Germany, because the debt break may be a burden or a hinder or a barrier for all future investments we have to focus on. So from this side, I think time is changing, and also the politics is changing in Germany. We have a general election in the end of September, mm-hmm. and afterwards, I think we will have a reform debate on debt break, and we will have a debate on future investment activity. And let me add to that, I'm very positive in general on the Next Generation EU, because the Next Generation EU for me is a starting point for creating European Union as an investment union. And this makes clear that we can do a lot together, that we can coordinate a lot of the conditions for the structural change, for the successful structural change in the business sector. And this is a new quality, and we have to use this.
Maya, to what extent is that an issue for banks? I mean, would you say that as long as the government is backing mm-hmm. the debt and the loans that the banks are making, it's fine because they have, this guarantee? Mm-hmm. Or do you have a sense that banks are under increasing pressure because the level of loans is increasing on the one hand, and on the other hand, even if they are being sustained and they are being helped, and liquidity issues in the short term are being taken care of, more and more companies are going to be in trouble?
Mm-hmm. The first thing is to remind that last year there were fewer bankruptcies than the year before. Mm. So the bankruptcies are at an historical low. Mm. And there were lots of new companies created, lots of new businesses launched. Mm. So lots of people trust the future in a way, or are trying to diversify their activity.
Yes, but some would argue that the fact that you have fewer bankruptcies last year reflects the fact that it was easy to get financing, and that perhaps you supported companies that were not viable, the so-called zombie companies, and that when this excess, so to speak, of finance comes to an end, then we'll be faced with a massive wave of bankruptcies.
So this zombie story, frankly, I don't buy it.
Okay.
Why? Because the selection of state-guaranteed loans was done in a quite harsh way.
Okay.
And the second thing is that the time which was bought and which was given to everybody was done for finding other solutions. So in the slideshow, you will see that there is a graph on the recovery of sectors over the year with the National Statistical Institute figures. So we have most sectors coming back to their pre-2020 situation, with the notable exception of transport and of course tourism, everything which is linked with restaurants, hotels, etc. So all the others are more or less between -5 and +5 versus the previous year. So this is very close to the previous year situation. So all the companies in these sectors were able to recover, and so they have weathered the storm. And so all the aids now are concentrated on the distressed sector. Lots of evolution has been made, and there are studies going out showing that the aids are not taken by all companies. And this is very important to say everybody is allowed, but not everybody is taking this. Only the ones who need it are taking this. And I would say the strength of our system, whether the administrative or the banking system, is to be able to personalize and to help the companies make the good choice. So what is at stake today is to be able to talk not to zombie companies, but to companies which have the choice and need to change their model. And so how do you do to help them changing their model in the most efficient way? The answer is very simple. Last year, investment loans, which exclude state-guaranteed loans, increased by +6%. So the banks continued to grant credits to the economy in a way which is at the same time rational, because most of them still have projects and transformation and investments to finance. And it shows also that the machine is working outside the state-guaranteed loans. It's not the only way to finance companies. So in a nutshell, I would say that I would quote also Mario Draghi, because the second part of his sentence was, whatever it takes, and believe me, it will be enough. We often forget this part, but this is a good one.
So on the plus side, we've had an efficient government response that has limited the extent of the recession. We've had companies that are financially secure in most cases, obviously in not all of them, but there are no liquidity issues. The financial markets are holding up. That's fine. But we're still faced with a very difficult health and economic crisis. And I guess the question is, that produces tension, obviously. That produces social tensions as well. And we're beginning to see demonstrations in some unexpected places, Denmark, for example, the Netherlands. And so my question is this. For a state to be efficient, it has to be able to, plan to some extent, sometimes to take the long view, and sometimes to think months ahead. And is there any concern, in your opinion, Enrico, Letta, that because the social tensions might increase and the climate might become very difficult, that it may become increasingly difficult to govern efficiently because you're under so much pressure, then your ability to think ahead, to plan for the next crisis, to plan for the next year will be compromised?
Your point is a very interesting one, because I think that this crisis is pushing us, all the states, to think definitely at a change on the way in which the state works. I think we have to move from a state normality to a state crisis. The capacity of the state to adapt to crisis needs to be reinforced. And I think this is the key point.
And how do you do that?
Today. We have to change some structures. We have to change the way in which you train people in the public service. Not only people able to work on the same issue, on the same dossier forever, but also people able to change, to adapt, to expand. The capacity also to be in relationship with other partners, with the different levels. I think that was one of the problems of this crisis, because of course it was also a crisis full of big mistakes. The national level, the European level, the local level. We have a lot of misunderstandings on the three different levels. So how can we have a more efficient, more effective working on the local and regional and national level, for instance? On healthcare, it's a crucial issue. And maybe today, 10 months after the beginning of the crisis, maybe we learned something, but we are still very far from a very effective way to. So in my view, this crisis has definitely to push us to think at the state in a different level, in a different way. So how does it work, a state, a more digitalized state, the problem of the multi-level, the relationship with the other countries. I think we never experienced such a coordination or lack of coordination, but such a need of benchmark and taking good examples from the one or saying to the other, it's not the right way, and so on and so forth. So I think it's another way to think that Europe is so crucial today. I think we learned this other lesson.
We'll come back in a minute to what Europe has done so far. Pablo, what is your take on this? Are you concerned to some extent that social and economic tensions might become so high that it would affect the ability of a government or of the state to be able to take the long view?
I think it depends on many things, but I'd have to say legitimacy of government action is the most precious thing to a government, and it's the last thing that it should ever consider losing. Crisis management is all about identifying what is a trade-off and what isn't a trade-off, right? Trade-offs might be, for example, whether to inject direct help into companies or to incur in contingent liabilities for the state. There might be legitimate differences there, and governments might want to situate themselves on an efficient frontier. But there are things that aren't trade-offs. We've figured this out now. There isn't a trade-off between health and the economy, right? If you liberate the economy in such a way as to facilitate mobility, then the health situation explodes, and you have to shut down the economy at a bigger cost. And in the financial sector, there is no effective trade-off between social help and financial stability. It is tempting for governments to impose by statute that the banking sector extends credit. We think that the banking sector is much better at valuing credit, and it must decide by itself what credit to extend, which moratoria to extend. We can solve the coordination issues therein, but we can't force them. We mustn't force them to extend credit, because when you lose financial stability, and we in Spain are very much aware of this given the global financial crisis, you lose everything else, and social protection is destroyed. So the legitimacy of government is one of these non-trade-offs. One mustn't ever consider infringing or losing the legitimacy of government by non-exemplary behavior, for example, at the expense of some contingent or some expedient, right? That is an absolute. We must retain the legitimacy of government through exemplary behavior.
Professor Hüther, do you agree with this assessment, and do you sense that there's a danger there in some European countries with respect to the legitimacy of governments and social tensions that might, make things difficult for Europe?
In general, I would say yes, because such a situation of social tensions or public rights or whatever has to do with expectations which were not fulfilled. And at the beginning of the year, we had a lot of positive expectations due to the vaccine campaign, which just started. But now we realize that we are very slow in Europe, in the European Union specifically. Together with the lockdown and the ongoing lockdown, which comes from one phase to the next, just for 3 months in Germany. It's an historical new experience we just have to accept or to see. And I think this changed the society, this changed public mood, and the legitimacy of the public, of the political actions may be questioned. And therefore, you had to define what is the new normal after the peak of the crisis. In general, I would say we have to realize that, in my perspective, that after the summer, in autumn and winter next year, we will have, from this to the next year, we will have another wave of COVID-19. There is no chance to bring it to zero. So if it's such a case, we need a public debate about what is the acceptance or the level of acceptance due to the COVID crisis, to the COVID-19 virus. In which way we will accept the number of new infections, the number of deaths in relation with the COVID-19. We will have the next wave in autumn, winter will be a smaller one due to the vaccine, but look on the fact what this goes in other health risks we have. If you have this idea, then policy have to define a new strategy just up from Easter on through the summertime. We discussed this here in North Rhine-Westphalia. I'm a member of the expert council from the North Rhine-Westphalian government in the COVID-19 period. And we just said we have to define what is the new normal. And in Germany, in the last few weeks, we have two camps. The one camp is, as I belong to, is say we have also in the future, we have to live with this virus and the vaccine, but there's still the risk. On the other hand, there's the zero COVID camp. And if you have a promise of zero COVID and policy try to achieve this goal, and it's not possible because in an open world, in this structure of Europe, of the continental Europe, there is no chance to have to come down to zero COVID. Then we will have a totally different risk. And last argument, what is the learning for the public servants is that crisis management is also about risk management. In a normal daily business, the public servants are not faced with risks. They have to organize in the legally defined way. But here, in the crisis like this, they have to manage risk, and that is not what they normally do. And this is a lesson we have to learn, and we have to ask what Enrico Letta said in the multi-level public statehood in Germany, the statehood here in Europe, and especially Germany, the federal state. We need a new spirit of crisis management.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, being able to change the way, state civil servants are trained and their ability to think more in terms of risk management. It seems obviously very valid. Let's talk about Europe for a moment and maybe close the discussion with what has happened over the past month. We were discussing before entering the discussion, Enrico, and you were telling me that you had a sense that Europe had achieved more in the past 10 months than it did in the past 10 years. What did you mean by that?
Facts, first of all. I think we never had, and we never even imagined to have 750 billion euros for a sort of doubling the European budget.
And a common debt European instrument.
And mostly for investments. And we know very well that Europe needs investments, and it is the most important challenge for Europe in relationship with the rest of the world, with China, with the US, and we need to have investments to raise the level of our economy and our companies. So I think, first of all, it's a point of link to the dimension of the intervention. Second, the rapidity of the intervention. If I think that 10 years ago, we took 4 years since the beginning of the crisis, autumn 8 to the ESM 12, 4 years. And for this crisis started in March, if I may say, and then May the 18th, we had the Franco-German meeting that was the very beginning of the idea of the creation of the idea of Next Generation EU. Then July European Council and December European Council for the final approbation. So in 9 months, we did it, and we did something that is incomparable with what Europe did in the last 10 years. And at the same time, I think the European Union was very good in raising for the first time after 70 years a true social Europe. That is, in my view, essential, is a pillar that is essential aside of all the discussions that we are having today on financial issues, on how to finance economy. But we know very well that without a strong social pillar, it's very complicated to be successful at European level. And we know very well that there was a big obstacle. And I remember all the tales of Jacques Delors about what Margaret Thatcher did to stop any move and any achievements for social Europe at the very beginning. And it was the same later on. So I think Brexit, at the end of the day, has been a fantastic opportunity for the European Union. And we have to stop crying. This is my take on that. Because, of course, they decided. It is a shame, it's a pity. But we can take some opportunities from that. One of the opportunities is related to the fact that now we are able to move for the creation of a social Europe. And we are in the period of the Portuguese presidency. And the Portuguese summit in Porto May will be on social Europe. And the plan SURE was approved. The ESM for healthcare was approved. So I think there are many, many important achievements even on that point.
Yes, social Europe is certainly more important than ever because inequality everywhere is increasing. Would you agree, Atig, that Europe has done a good job of making things happen quicker and obviously making this huge step forward of being able to issue a European common debt? How important was that?
What was important, according to me, is the fact that it was possible to build a huge plan and something very ambitious with common objectives on very different grounds, and to find a solution where you give, common, I would say, a common way and a common way of looking forward, and you say, we know that there are differences between countries, and so each one will build, even at the local level, his solutions with the same money, the same objectives. And this is very strong, because this is what we all want in centralized countries. We want the money and the decision to be centralized, but the solution to be local. And this is a very good articulation. It's very positive to see that it can work. So, this is very, I would say it would be very useful to continue this way, because it will make us future ready in Europe.
Pablo, from your standpoint, how important was it to be able to to rely for the first time on a European common debt instrument? And is that something we should push further?
I think it was a game changer. I think it was historical. It wasn't quite a Hamiltonian moment, if you're going to get picky about it. But I think it was an extremely valuable step forward. We have the opportunity to set up the liquid, stable, available, abundant, safe asset that the Eurozone has been lacking all these years. To complete the Euro area, this is an indispensable tool. Now we have an asset that can hope to someday rival the US Treasury in liquidity, availability, and use as a reference. So I think we should take advantage of it. And I think we should help these consensus building in order to allow the Commission to keep issuing, to make it standardized, because I think the benefits for the Euro and for individual DMOs, government issuers, is obvious. Far from competing, I think there will be more money from international investors pouring into Spain, Italy, France, and Germany because this safe asset is available. I think the Bund is an ad hoc and possibly even inadequate safe asset that produces disequilibria. So when you have a common safe asset in which international investors can all pour in, we can have a better functioning euro. So I am very excited by this prospect and look very much forward to seeing it flourish.
I think you will agree, Pablo, that for this to happen, one condition needs to be met, and that is that Germany has to agree. So how about it, Professor Hüther? How about pushing this European common debt instrument further? Do you think Germany would be amenable to it?
It depends on the person who asks in Berlin, for example. We will see after the general election. Maybe there's a cleaning up of the setting, and we will have a restart in the German debate. But I agree that the next generation EU is really historical in the sense that it could be a new perspective, as I said earlier in our debate, as a European investment union, and therefore we need this European bond. As a safe asset that will have an impact on the capital markets and could strengthen the European position in international perspectives. It's quite clear. It's really an important point. But therefore, we need a general common sense about the idea of the next generation EU. Is this only something like a fund for reconstruction? Or is this something like an investment union idea? And in the second sense, I would say this could be a strong argument in Germany and for German politicians to agree, because we have a lot of need on infrastructure investment on common ground in Europe to do it together. And therefore, it's a good idea to use this new financing instrument. And let me add two other points. We should not forget that Europe started in a very poor position, because in March, it was all about the national authorities. The closing of borders was really a negative experience for Europe. But then Europe came back very soon in April with the April package, 540 billion sure for unemployment, for short-time working scheme, the European Investment Bank program, and additional from the ESM for first setting in the different health sectors. And then we had this acceptance of the next generation EU, and I think that's really an interesting experience we made. It's in historical terms, it's really more positive than negative. But we have to learn that also on the European level, we need something like a crisis management and a capacity for some actions we never did before. For example, the negotiations the European Commission had to make with the producers of the vaccine, and we were too late. And the treaties are not designed as it should be at the state of the art. So there's more positive, but also some negative in the assessment of European politics in 2020.
Thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there. It was a rather constructive way of putting things and to demonstrate that Europeans can agree on innovative and new debt instruments, and specifically that will be able to carry us forward. So thank you very much to all of you for taking part in this discussion. Professor Hüther, Pablo de Ramon-Laca in Madrid, Maya Atig in Paris. Thank you very much. Enrico, Letta, thanks very much for being with us. And thank you very much for all of you for taking part and following this discussion, which was the second roundtable of this Coface Country Risk Conference. More to come.